6 o'clock, so we want to start promptly here. I want to thank you all for coming out tonight. This is the second of a series of reforms that we tried to have this week to display and answer any questions and educate people on the latest changes to our proposed Justice Center. There was a proposed site, when we had our first choice of site, we had a design. That site had changed, and so this is our display to show people what the new proposed site looks like and answer any questions related to that. So with that, let's jump right into it.
Chris, real quick.
Yeah. This is officially a public meeting because there's more than 4 of us in the room. So there is a copy of the Open Meetings Act right here if anybody wants to read it. And also, when you get ready to speak, if you can, for the record, say your name so the county clerk can be official on record. So we're good. Okay.
Thank you.
Now, back to this piece. The project that we've been undertaking is got 3 guiding principles. 1, to meet the Douglas County juvenile court space needs. 2, to improve and transform our juvenile justice system and the design of that facility to improve the lives of children and families. But 3rd, also to inspire civic pride. When we say that, we're not only talking about the concept of the design of the building, we're talking about the programming and the overall effort that we as a board are making to build on the progress that is happening around the country to improve juvenile justice. What we've been trying to do for the last 10 years and what other people have done and what we're trying to do with this project is build on things around the country and try to take that to the next level by making sure that we're building on what best practices is, but trying to address the next level of what juvenile justice reform could be and to help progress that movement. So with that, the second slide that it goes to some degree, I'm going to give you a little background and then turn it over to Bruce to show the design. So if you stand there, if you start there in the middle with consolidated services, when I first got on the board some years ago, there were 2 pressing juvenile issues. One was the fact that we had no space in the entire county. That particular was exacerbated up in the juvenile courtroom and the juvenile part of our facility. Second was we had a rise and increase in the number of kids that were detained in our juvenile justice facility. At the time, the housing unit maximum was 144 kids. At some point, we were averaging between 220 and 210 kids a day. At that point, the board made a conscious decision to try to get at the root of that problem. We had an outside person come in and do the study, and the end result of that was us eventually making the decision to become what's called a JDAI site, a JDI site. That stands for Juvenile Detention Alternative Initiative. That's a program by the Annie Casey Foundation that is built on 8 principles, and those principles are to make sure at the core of it that a kid only sits in detention who needs to. If they don't need to be there, the goal is to find alternative services in the community so they can be served and get at the core root of the problem. 10 years ago, we became part of that project and went to a sister county. That county was Multnomah County, which is Portland is the home base. When we went there on that visit, we first came upon the concept of co-located services. They had all-in-one juvenile justice facility that encompassed everything to do with juvenile justice and was a part of their key reform act. And at that point, those of us that went on that visit saw that this is where we wanted to go as an ultimate in trying to reform our system. That was about 10 years ago. Bring us forward to between this 10-year period in partnership with key members of the state legislature. The board was actively involved in trying to reshape policies that were at the state level to reform juvenile justice. We made investments and changes of our own here, brought on a JDI coordinator, and as of last year, we had several conversations before that about trying to create a one-stop facility. Last year, the political will and everything came together where we could move on that initiative. As you may have heard, we began that initiative on the site that was the old United Way building, the OHA building. Now we move back to the MEB building, and the facility now sits there with that design. At the core of that building, though, is in the lower right-hand corner, where it says Policy and Statutes LB 1112. LB 1112 was a law that was passed last year by the state legislature that goes into effect this July. What the heart of that law says is that a kid can no longer sit in detention for lack of placement, meaning When you go to the adult side of the facility, you can go there and serve your time out. When you're in the juvenile side of the justice system, you come to our facility to await placement somewhere, meaning juvenile justice in the state of Nebraska is totally rehabilitated. For instance, the kid sits there to wait to go to a service, or if that kid did a serious crime, they're waiting there to be placed and go to the Nebraska Youth Prison over in East Omaha by the airport. LB 1112 says that a kid can't stay there for lack of placement, and with that change, July 1, we've been making meeting and trying to add programs and make changes to try to prepare for that process that happens July 1. You go to the lower left-hand corner where it says housing and services. For the last year, we've been working with probation to try to get those programs up to speed. Now, probation is a state entity that we partner with. The partnership that the county has with probation is the fact that probation is under the court system, but we pay for probation space and other logistical needs. So there's a partnership there in dealing with that. What we've been doing over the last year is working on a couple of projects. The first one is a pilot with the Child Savings Institute, where we are going to begin, and I hope soon here within the next month or so. Right now we're waiting on approvals from the state in regards to safety and privacy on a few matters. But Child Savings Institute is going to start a program where the police will be, Child Savings Institute will be the point of facilitation for when a kid has an offense. Child Savings Institute, instead of taking kids down to the detention center, our goal is to not even have them touch that facility unless they need to. They'll go to CSI and get their assessments. The police will bring them there and drop them off, and at that point, CSI will begin the process of trying to facilitate the connection to services for that family. The kid hopefully will not have to sit there in detention. They will facilitate those services. They will go home with their family, and then they will be ready to show up for court the next day. The CSI program is a part of a culture change that we're trying to say to get away from detention totally, unless it's really a must. Second program listed up there is the Omaha Home for Boys. The Omaha Home for Boys is they're working to establish a day center, a day reporting center, but that day reporting center has the distinction of being used for behavioral health emphasis. If there are kids with behavioral health instances that can be at home, they can be stabilized in this day facility where there will be behavioral health resources and services, so they don't have to sit in the detention center to have that. They will be able to be in the community, get served, be with their families. The second point up there is Utah Holly. Shelter beds are a big issue. Utah Holly has agreed to increase their shelter bed services for females. Probation has been working with them to add additional beds, and with this, our hope is that those kids, and particularly young ladies that are sitting in there for shelter beds, will be able to get that service. We're trying to negotiate and finalize a deal with boys for shelter care. They're close to it, but they're at a point where I can't announce who that is yet until they close the deal on that contract. The next project is with the UNMC, Creighton University, and Charles Drew on what we call the Behavioral Health Stabilization Program. One of the big issues that we have with our kids that are sitting in there waiting for evals, that's at the heart of the lack of mental health capacity across the whole state. What that partnership does is it allows us to be able to speed up the evaluation processes for the court so that kid won't have to stay there, and instead of them sitting in the detention center and being stabilized, those kids will be able to go with Charles Drew Health Center if that's their choice, and they will be able to be stabilized through med management and behavioral health services through Charles Drew Health Center to make sure that they're served until they get back through the court process and get their alternative placements and things in place. So they don't have to sit in the detention center to be stabilized, and they can be with home with their families. And the other pieces that I want to go to there is, if we go to the right, top left-hand corner. Internally, over the last years, we tried to make some additional moves in the county. This year we brought an expediter that's close to being on the year. What an expediter is in the process system is a person who works close in the detention center to work with those kids that are there that are, for lack of a better term, stuck in the system. Those kids that have sat there and not moved for a long period of time, that person's job is to work with other people in the system trying to find out what's the cause of not being placed. What things do we have to get there? What do you need? How can we help you to get that kid moving through the system? And the other thing is we've got a high-level group that's been meeting now to try to talk about the responsibilities of what are the key stick points, what things need to be in place service-wise to get us to the point of having a better chance of connecting families when they need or get into the system. To the far upper right corner, where it says policy, practice, and consultants, one of the things that came out big when one of the things that JDI is based on is data. And we're in the process now of trying to facilitate an agreement and begin the pilot to start with a few groups and then bring more in with a group called Promise that Commissioner Borgeson connected with out of town, and we've been talking to try to pilot with us to increase and make our data analytics more robust so we can be able to really identify where some things are, have better management of the outcomes of the programs, and be able to work to try to find out where the stick points are in the system so we can move things along in that respect. And the second piece up there is noted with the Burns Institute. The one thing about JI that's systematic across the country is when you begin there and you get through looking at the data, you're able to get to the low-hanging issues that are there. The smaller the number gets, the harder the cases get to deal with the kids. So when we were at, 210 now, we fluctuate somewhere between 60 and 80. Today it's at 71. When those numbers go down, the sore point that sticks out in there in mostly every county that's involved is the term called disproportionate minority contact. And that's basically meaning that our system has more kids of color that are represented in the public. At this current time, total kids of color is somewhere between 60% that are in there. So we've hired a DMC coordinator to try to get on top of that issue. The board's doubled down on that. And we're working with the Burns Institute that has a national representation to try to help us get up to speed on our policies and state points in that respect. So the building is a continual part of our program and our effort over the last 10 years to reform the system. I mentioned LB12 and everything around it because LB12 is an issue that's happening. LB1112 is an issue that's happening right now that we're going to address, which leads us into some of our philosophies in regards to building design and other things. So with that, I'll turn it over to Bruce, and then we'll come back up and answer questions.
Thank you, Chris. My name is Bruce Carpenter. We've been working with Chris and the Douglas County Board for a little bit over a year, I think, and looking at sites. We visited other communities that had comparable population across the country. DC, Washington, D.C. has about the same population. Baltimore, Ramsey County or St. Paul and Minneapolis, two separate counties. St. Paul is closer to Douglas County at about 550,000 population, and every community, and Johnson County and Kansas City, and there's also a project in Tarrant County, which is Fort Worth, a little larger population base. We also talked to King County, which is Seattle. They have a project that's currently underway and will open, I think, within the next year. So every place, every community we talk to, and the experts that design these types of facilities in our office identify the #1 priority is to have co-located services to improve the efficiency, reduce the amount of time that the youth are in detention, and improve the communication and the access for families to have probation and the attorneys and the courts and the youth center all in one location that has good accessibility with public transportation. That was the #1 priority. And all of the programs that Chris touched on are critical. The building is part of that. And so that's what I was going to talk about here. Just on the scope, we met with the people that will be in the building to identify their space needs, number of rooms, the size of those rooms, and then all of that rolls up to the overall size of the building. So there's 4 kind of basic elements. One's noted the judicial tower, which is the courts, and that has attorneys. It also has community program space on the first floor lobby. So we're looking at 6 finished courtrooms with 2 that would be shelled space for future fit up. So we're looking at future expansion needs of the county and the juvenile court system. And that building's 8 stories and about 140,000 square feet. With this latest acquisition of the MUD site, the acquisition also included their existing building. So the MUD building will be renovated. They've taken good care of that over the years, and it's an excellent building, and the systems are good in that building. So that's 4 stories, about 40,000 square feet. And that right now is planned for the probation offices, but also the entire first floor would be a large room for community use. It would also provide touchdown space where the programs that Chris went through could come and visit with families and the kids. So that's 40,000. And then the youth center, which is a residential, there's right now it's planned for 64 rooms in modules of 8 rooms each. That's a staffing requirement set by the state, where you have to have 1 staff member per 8 rooms. So they're in modules of 8, and then there's shared common space. And 64, I think everybody understands, is less than the current number, which is about 70 to 80 today. There's been a steady decline of about 7.5% a year in the what we call the average daily population of the youth center. We're thinking that more focus on these programs will accelerate that decline in the number. And we'll show you some examples of comparable populations that have quite a bit smaller number in their detention. And then also working on, by having a co-located, working on the efficiency to reduce the time that the kids are waiting for court or an evaluation, as Chris said, so reducing the length of stay. There's also a connection, a skywalk connection from the Judicial Tower to the original Hall of Justice, which was built in 1912. When we started the project, it was 116 years old. Now it's 117 years old. So it served the county well, and that's what we're looking for, a building that would have a life of at least 50 years and hopefully 100 years, but it's hard to predict the future. Some of the amenities that the co-location provides is from the youth center, a direct connection to the courts, so the kids can just walk down the corridor and meet with a judge or an attorney. And then the common support space, education, library, consult for behavioral or medical assistance, an outdoor area that you'll see on the roof with actual natural plantings. That's something that we haven't seen in any of the facilities we visited, but we feel that can bring down the drama or the trauma, bring down the kind of what we term as trauma-informed design. We're trying to relieve stress for these kids. Their minds, until they're over 20, are still in formative state. So we're trying to, in a large part, change the trajectory of where these kids are headed. Hopefully we can get them to be productive adults in the community rather than continuing on a path to corrections and as an adult. And that makes a big difference, and we have some information on that as well. So the Justice Center, the community meeting rooms and offices for community service providers, again, the direct connection to the youth center, secure connection to the Hall of Justice, secure parking, for judges and a lot of rooms outside the courts for family meetings before they go into the courts with attorneys and discussion. And sometimes things are resolved in those family meeting rooms. So the two dark blocks of space are the new buildings. On the top of the site, the north side of the site is Harney Street. On the south side, Howard Street. On the right side is 17th Street. On the east side, on the west side is 18th Street. So this entire block was owned by MUD, and so the site acquisition was finalized about a month ago. And it really suits the program well. You can see the light blue dash line over to the Hall of Justice. That's the skywalk, and then the trees in the center are a public courtyard that's outside the entrance to both the probation and the Justice Center tower. This is a slice, a vertical slice that just shows how the building is organized vertically, so parking below grade, community and lobby on the first level that's off the public courtyard, and 2 levels of courts, court administration and support, and then the attorney offices above that. The smaller block on the left side is the housing, the youth center. So again, lobby on the street level, 2 levels, 16 rooms per level. I'm sorry, 32 rooms per level, so a total of 64. And then a full-size high school gymnasium, a court on the roof that's enclosed, and then an open space that we'll show. So this is an image from Harney Street that shows the public courtyard, and then a connector at the back that has some color that connects the MUD building, that would be probation and community services on the right, to the tower with the courts on the left, and then the youth center kind of in the background behind that connector. The image that shows the skywalk connection from the new tower to the Hall of Justice. The OPPD building is on the far left, if you're familiar with the site. And then a view looking to the west. This is the youth center. It's 4 stories, basically the offices on street level, so there's glass and activity on street level, and then 2 floors of housing units, and then the top level is open, but we extend the wall above, so it gives the kids up there some privacy, and also the neighborhood some privacy as well. So we have an image of what that looks like from the roof. We talk about trauma-informed, and that includes materials. So these doors are wood finish as opposed to a steel metal. The walls are smooth painted finish like you would have in your house versus a concrete block. They're still secure and durable. The doors are secure and durable, but it gives it doesn't make the kids feel like they're a criminal at a time when they're just being detained. They haven't been adjudicated at this point. They're waiting for their court date. So we're trying not to help them think they're criminal and get that impression in their mind. This is a restorative environment and trauma-informed. So the colors and the materials, the daylight, all of that helps. This is inside one of the rooms, durable, simple, but still the colors and the daylight help change the environment. And then the outdoor, you can see the exterior walls that go up around the perimeter, about 12 feet, and then some natural plant. So Hennepin is essentially Minneapolis. It's twice a little more than twice the size of Douglas County in population, 1.2 million. They're also a restorative or therapeutic model. They're licensed for 88 beds. Their average daily population is 45, which is quite a bit less than where we're at today, even with more than twice the population. Ramsey County is St. Paul, right across the river. They're almost identical in population, 538,000. They're licensed for 44 beds. This was last year. Their average daily population was 24. Today they're at 16. And the first quarter of this year they were averaging 12. So as Chris said, they continue to work together, the judges, the law enforcement, the attorneys, the community services, to reduce the number of kids that are in the detention, in the system, and find alternative placements where they get better care and better service. So that in a nutshell is what we're trying to accomplish. This shows a little bit of detail on the construction costs, the main courts and renovation of the MUD and the skywalk. These are construction costs is about 69 million. The youth center is 27, but there's a philanthropic gift from the Sherwood Foundation of 5 million towards the youth center, so that reduces that to 22 million. And then there's, so that comes to about 91 million. And then there's soft costs, fixed equipment, movable equipment like the chairs you're sitting in, the audio equipment, security, all of the testing and fees and services for consultants are in there. So the total project, it also includes about $5 to $6 million in contingency. So for unknown costs, as we move through the project over 3 years, there's going to be things that come up. So a relatively tight contingency, but we're working and designing towards a $114 million budget. You can see about 75% of it is the courts building. So the other benefit to the community of reducing the number of kids in contention and changing their trajectory to be more productive in the community is the cost benefit. And I would say we do it because it's a benefit to the kids, but what the result of that is, this is a study that Ernie Goss has and a couple of others have looked at. So the parameters are, what if we're able to reduce the number of kids by 40, which we think is realistic. If we're at 80, get down to 40. It's taken over the 20-year period. The bond is actually a 30-year bond, but this snapshot up here is the result of a 20-year period. And the big number is savings due to reduced recidivism. So that means keeping these kids out from reoffending, getting them services to improve their education. There's actually, and we've seen this nationally. It's about, if you invest $1, you get a $5 return, and we wanted to test it in Douglas County. So these are testing the operational costs of the youth center, and we get about, over 20 years, about a $4.17 return on a dollar investment. So it's 164 million in benefits over 20 years. If you expand that to 30, it goes to over $6 a return on a dollar investment. So it's not only, I think, the right thing to do, it also has a benefit to the county economically to make these changes. And so this is important work. The building's part of it, the programs are part of it, and it's not easy work to make these changes, but we think that we have meetings with all of the parties, law enforcement, the judges, the attorneys, and community service providers, and I'm optimistic that we're going to make a significant positive change in the community. That concludes my remarks.
So before we open up, I just want to make one point. Bruce mentioned mentioned Ramsey County. So Ramsey County is also a JI site like us. We started in 2010. Ramsey started in 2005. And there's a group of us that went there about a week ago to look at it. We've been kind of working with them and looking at what they were doing to try to make a mark on where we are and trying to see what the next level of progress is. And so what Ramsey stated to us, and I think that we're at that same page now, probably at that 10-year mark, you have to kind of regather and re-up your efforts. Because what got you to where you may be now in your form, you're going to need to double up to get there. So they mentioned some of the stuff that they did in some respects that kind of put them at that point where they converted and got down to the 16 point. I actually think that's where we are now, in similar phase, where the board has doubled up, and the board that says we're committed to going to that next level. The 10 years that we've been involved in this, it's been a point of phases, and this project with the building is not the end all and be all. The building is a part of the phase. The program will be continual and something that will evolve as we go. So I just say that to that. We're at a pivot point here of where we're kind of at this point where we can go over the hill to the next level of reduction and services to family and children. So with that, you want to answer any questions you may have, dispel any myth that I know is out there, and any other thing that may be applicable. So, what's got a question, Larry?
I have the mic here for anybody who has questions.
So I have a couple questions. So you mentioned the Child Savings Institute. Where's that located?
Child Savings Institute 2 is located roughly on 46 and Dodge.
So, correct me if I'm wrong, but if a juvenile gets arrested for committing a crime, they'll be taken to the Child Savings Institute, where they'll then be evaluated, and they'll determine what programming or whatever needs to be done to rehabilitate that offender.
Ideally, the point is to get there. Right now, we're beginning with certain level of cases. So yes, if the child commits an offense, the police will drop them off there at the Child Savings Institute.
So doesn't that kind of squash the co-location model? Because you now have the CSI site somewhere else compared relatively to your youth center.
No, the co-location model's strength comes in some of the savings that was noted there, but for instance, like in Minneapolis, you got a kid now that's in our court system, they schedule that kid a couple of days out to come to court. If for instance, a judge wants to see that kid right then, you can't just go pull that kid right then. You got to set up transportation costs,
Right.
And all that to do. Co-location allows you, if that judge wants to see him, that kid can come right over there and come. Right now, the purpose of CSI is not only is a culture change to separate this fact of even having a kid go down to the detention center. So what CSI will do, hopefully, is if a kid or family comes, that kid gets assessed there. The level that we'll start with, that kid, based on that assessment, will get connected to family services. They go home, the next day they show up in court. They will never see the detention center. So the point is to change the culture where, similar to Minneapolis, the question is always asked, what does this kid need? They don't even talk about detention unless it's the last piece. And that's what we're trying to get to, where you don't even have to have a family consider going down there, so it doesn't hit a co-location at all. It helps change the culture to get out of this mindset that detention is a cure.
Okay. And then, Bruce, you mentioned that the judges, the attorneys, and the law enforcement aspect is on board with this.
I said they're all at the table. You know, there's hard discussions, there's difficult discussions, but We've had meetings with both the Douglas County Sheriff, a couple representatives, and the Omaha Police Department, including Chief Schmatter. And Judge Kaler's been involved, and Don Klein, and Lauren, a representative from Tom Riley's office who handles the juvenile part of the public defender, and Mary Vicek, who's probation. So those are the people at the table.
So what worries me, now I'm not speaking on behalf of that union, I'm not a member of that union or any of the sort. The Omaha Police Officers Association came out and publicly stated that they are not in favor of this project. So if the law enforcement professionals of the largest police department in our entire state says that this does not go with best practices and that it's not something they're in favor of, to me that throws a pretty significant red flag. So what are you doing to address that?
Okay, let me correct you. The police union did say they don't support it. They said they didn't like the original size of the beds, which was 48. They're on record as saying they think the concept is good. And now they threw out a number in the paper that's like 100, 125 beds, and the board's not interested in that. That makes no sense. So, you know, there was discussion with them and other players, and I think that's where you guys get compromise of 64 and then going down. Now, when we get to this point, the point of it, we're going to start building 64, but if, you know, things go like we hope they will, and we think they will, if we're at 50 or something at that point, then we'll build 50. But the agreement or the understanding was we increase the bed space by 20 to 64. It was going to be 48 to 64. We're just going to build out. So they're supportive of the project. There's discussion about the size of the bed space. Now, to your point about law enforcement involvement from that slide that was put up there with the programs and
The diagram.
involved in, law enforcement has involved in every program that they're relevant to touch, which means that's CSI, because they had to feel comfortable with the drop-off point and they're involved in that process. All the other ones, probation is heavily involved because they're the decider and they're the ones that facilitate that service.
Okay, so then, this is my last question, I know I'm kind of looking up some time. So the county board had this study done, which is the Chin study, which is available on the county's website if you're curious. On page 93, it goes over the advantages and disadvantages of a downtown urban core located facility. And it has this wonderful little layout of pros and cons. And there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 pros, and 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 cons. They also did the same layout for building in a at-grade, low-level, campus-like setting, similar to like Boys Town, or what we currently have at 42nd and Woolworth. And there's 14 pros and 8 cons. So when the county uses tax dollars to pay for a study, and the study comes out and says, this is what we recommend, why is the county doing the opposite of that?
So there was a debrief after that study was out that we had in that respect, and that conversation happened. One, she wasn't opposed to downtown facility, but the question was having kids stacked up. So that design reflects that to some degree. Now, there was a conversation about wide open space, but, you know, people had a big issue about us considering eminent domain in one building. You know how much land we have in eminent domain? To make that happen, the only place that is available is way out west. And that's not an option because of transportation. If you look at most of the data, most of the kids in the system and the families in the system are east of 90. And so that was ideal circumstances. So there wasn't an option to do that. So the land that was available to us was the best option. And the one the board chose to go to after looking at some other spots. I mean, if you would have asked us 5 years ago about this project when we were talking about doing it then, 5, 6 years ago, the project would have been at 42nd Street. If you asked us 2 years ago, the project would have been at the old Federal Reserve building. But now it all came together and it's at the MUD building. So that was considered, that conversation would happen with, Karen Chen, and she was pleased with the decision we were talking about.
So it also says in that report, on page 79, many of the goals of JDI are currently unmet in the juvenile justice system in Douglas County.
That's what I mentioned to you about.
What have we done to address that? Because if we're using that model for this new facility, shouldn't we make sure all of their goals are met before we build a new building and spend $120 million?
That's what I mentioned to you at the point of every site goes through a point of kind of recalibration and rededication to it to kind of focus in. We're saying that goals weren't met, but some goals were met. So, matter of fact, there was a discussion today at the quarterly JDI report that comes to the board. As the board gets more educated on it, the board knows where to push certain places. One of the things that is a constant thing in JDI is that every system point will have their day in the sunlight. So it's not easy, but right now the board is pushing certain things to change to some degree. So it's right. There are certain things there that we're still pushing with people on to make culture change on, but that's just a part of the continuing process. So yeah, there's some things that are not working. One of those things are to increase parts and options for alternatives, which LB 1112 has helped push the ball down the road on that. And if everything's ideal, not only did sure would contribute $5 million to the facility, but they contribute $5 million to the program, which will help us get to the place where a lot of those issues or next goals that Karen Chen mentioned we can get to.
So this is more or less a question for Bruce.
Yeah, so let me say this. It's not a lot of people here, so at the very first meeting, we had a time limit. I figured with 27 people here, I shouldn't have to, but I'm gonna cut you off on that so other people get a chance to
So can I just finish this
I'm
one?
gonna finish with one question.
So it's a question for Bruce. So I was at the meeting last night and down in South Omaha, and I have this one, and I'll be at the one on Thursday. Why is the presentation completely different from last night?
But it's not, there's a couple of slides that are different, and if you remember, we had a little bit of a technical issue, and we had to change to a laptop, and previous presentation was brought up. I think the only two were the amenities for the two facilities and the last slide on the economic impact. So that's the difference. We can get you both copies and you can compare the differences, but it's same substance.
And then that number on square footage that I asked for last night, did you get that figure yet?
On the common space?
Yeah, on what the total square footage of that was?
No, I haven't got that.
Okay.
We'll get that to you.
Yes, ma'am.
Good evening, my name is Michaela Jackson. I have a plethora of questions, but one that's really boiling is that I'm not opposed to the new structural facilities or what have you. My concern is why are we waiting until this is built to implement these changes and get things expedited? Why are our young people now waiting in excess, I'll use my own child for example, waited in excess of 45 days on 3 different accounts for placement? And I will tell you, in response to that as well, the youth center was the safest place for my son. Had he not been there and been safe and protected, he was fed, he was dressed, he was groomed. He had a mom that called every night that checked on him. I couldn't talk to him, but he was safe. Had they sent him home with me, he would not have been safe because he runs. He was a danger to himself and unfortunately to society as well. But if we're trying to expedite these things now, waiting for this structural piece to take place, why can't we expedite the services now?
To your question, we're not waiting on the building to operate now. As I mentioned, LB 1112 is happening, is officially in effect July 1, so we're trying to ramp up for that. I don't know the situation of your child per se, but as soon as we can, one of the aspects that this tries to address with the investment of the additional money for programs, assuming by how you're talking, there may be a behavioral health matter at the table. So we're not waiting, there's just not the capacity right now. And I think it's honest to say that a lot of that is partnership with the state. One of the avenues that will happen over the last 10 years has been committed to, in addition to the facility you see now, the $5 million that Sherwood is committed toward programming. There's another lead gift that they committed to an 18-bed next level behavioral health facility. That's 2 years offline. But for your issue right now, nobody's waiting. Some of the major players need to step in some degree to provide that next level of service. And in all honesty, that's the state. And this project that's going on, the county is stepping up and putting investment in some degree that, you know, there's probably in the realm of another jurisdiction. So we're not waiting. I think there's a lack of capacity for whatever that issue may be. And, you know, we're trying to get to it as fast as we can. That discussion happened this morning. I think some of that situation may be a court process thing that we're trying to wade through, and a lot of that, if you get into behavioral health mode, is a capacity we may not have.
The expediter, we've also established.
Yeah, and the expediter is supposed to get at that. Now, there's things that we've asked them to give back to us as a board to say what are the glitches in this first year of the expediter's piece. So the expediter has, for certain situations, made calls, asked what's going on. There's certain aspects in the system. One aspect is, you know, who is that kid's representation? I don't know who's doing that to some degree, but there's some responsibility there. But the other piece from the expediter's point of view right now is just for that, maybe for that level of behavioral care, we just don't have the capacity. So they're there. Now, the one thing about the law that needs to be noted is that July 1, the law comes into effect. A kid that's for lack of placement in there. Something they clarified for me is that if a kid's sitting in there and they were there before July 1, you're not just putting those kids on the street. It's not retroactive. So if you're in there before July 1 and you don't have lack of placement, you're not getting put out. We got to work through and try to find that. But kids that fit that criteria after July 1, you're not going to be let in. So that's a little bit what we get to with the design and layout space-wise for 3 years out. If we can't hit that in 3 years, then I will be very disappointed.
Thank you.
So, one of the first things we heard when we started to talk to the people in juvenile justice is the time needed for psychiatric assessment, and the county board took action on that and now has an agreement with UNMC and Charles Drew to provide that services. It was hard to get private doctors to participate in the juvenile system because it's difficult. So they took action, and now there's an agreement, and hopefully that will reduce that amount of time. So I think kind of picking off where do we see issues, the county board's been reactive, and so that's an excellent point, and that's one of the things we're trying to improve.
Thank you.
And just to note that I don't know the situation, so I couldn't elaborate, but to this point, which is good, the board 3 months ago approved $31,000 to get that program going pilot-wise. Supposed to get at behavioral health, management of that, but it's still working through, so I don't know if your kid will fit that or not.
Well, let me just because I have to celebrate. My kid graduated from high school with a 3.5 GPA in about 2 weeks. So, but that also comes from a very involved parent, and that's another issue that can be dealt with another day because our parents need our help, and fortunately, I have the skills to, you know, advocate for mine, and so my job now is to give back and help other parents advocate for theirs.
And I think the fair point to be made from your view, knowing that you're assistant principal at my kid's school, is that, you know, that kid's in a pretty stable family. And the point that everybody needs to know here tonight is that there's this perception out there that this kid that we talk about dealing with here is a kid that's in the eastern part of the city, or that may be the profile of it, but every kid, I don't care what background you're from is at risk. You can be in the soundest home around and you are vulnerable to that point. So when we're talking about this project, you know, there's a perception out there with some people that you're trying to address a certain deal. Now, this is for everybody, because any kid can do something stupid and get themselves caught up in there, and there's no reason that you should have to be in when you can handle some things with simple measures. And that's the whole part of where this thing is trying to get at. Yes, sir.
Chris, I'd like to know if there's,
Give your name and address.
Larry Shore, 5015 Lafayette Avenue. I'd like to know if there's any other best practices people in the room.
What do you mean
The
by
reason
best
I
practice?
ask that is,
What do you mean by best practice?
well, no, you shouldn't ask me that, because your body and the city council quotes best practices on all this stuff. If you don't know who that is and what it is, then what are we spending money on?
Well, I can give you
But-
three different definitions.
But let me finish up here, because I've been a parent. I've been a mischievous boy. I have a mischievous son. I have a mischievous grandson and a mischievous daughter. I was with Boy Scouts. I was young adult council corrections in Potawatomi County. And I was a Boy Scout when they started the new system called Achievement Place Method, which of course was the best practices of that day. Behavior modification, if you will. Tough love, if you will. And it doesn't always work. Not all of these kids, my point being, not all of these kids can be assessed because some person that has a degree or had 10 hours of training pointed them out and said, that kid needs to be detained, needs to be assessed, needs to be here for 5 days, and then we'll send them back home. Maybe the parents can't have them back home, as your situation was. That's something that the professionals that don't know the kids cannot come up with overnight. So let's don't rush, or we'll have too many Robbie Hawkins out there on drugs, medications, to cover up their behaviors instead of get to the root of the problem. I think that's what you all want, but you don't do that overnight.
So, this is one thing from the heart of your question. You mentioned the assessment piece. What happens, you may or may not know, law enforcement officer picks up a kid. That kid gets assessed by probation. Probation makes the decision if it's in Douglas County's facility, not Douglas County. Probation is the state. But this risk assessment that's done is not determining the diagnosis with the kid. The risk assessment is only to determine risk, because until that kid gets before the judge to determine adjudication, you're managing risk. You don't want a kid that needs to be in detention, sitting in detention if they have to. So the assessment is to pretty much take information, see what's going on, talk to related people, and say, is this kid a risk to the public safety by being out? That's all it does. So the risk assessment is not determining any diagnosis or anything like that. That's what the court does in regards to talking to the attorney, the guardian ad litem, the caseworker, other things of that sort. When we say risk assessment, from risk assessment, you determine if that kid needs to be in detention. And what we're trying to say is, and you know, Minneapolis or Ramsey has this down good, is that, and I feel stronger and stronger about this as I hear it and understand it more. You don't need to sit there, you need to go home. And we need to take the services for you to get you home, and the question is managing risk. So the assessment does not determine the diagnosis. The assessment determines if you're a risk to show back up at court and get the services that you need as a juvenile. And that's what we're trying to do, is manage risk. Yes, sir.
Commissioner Doug Kagan. My question is this: during your presentation, you mentioned something about hiring a coordinator to handle minority youth or something like that. Is this a temporary or a permanent position? How much is the salary, and what exactly is his job description?
The salary is probably around $70,000. I'm not, so give or take. The position has come to Douglas County because there's a Title II grant through the Juvenile Justice Prevention and Delinquency Act. each state gets Title II money. The state of Nebraska decided not to take their Title II money. I was on the state commission at that point. I believe a lot of the reason is the state wasn't keeping track of the DMC numbers adequately. When the state decided not to take that money, Douglas County applied for it and received it. So that's how we're funding the DMC coordinator for the first 3 years. I can safely assume the board's committed to that position. So when that happens, that position will remain in to address that need. That person's role is supposed to work with decision points in the system to try to, one, educate about implicit bias, note out certain factors that happen at the decision points in the system, and try to educate and train individuals on how to manage things better to get at DMC. There's training in that position. There's analyzation of data at certain decision points, and trying to get at the core part of the DMC is what are the services that those kids may need, so they don't end up in the system. Now, when I mention the implicit bias part, I'm talking about signs and things that are proven that everybody has in regards to signs, things that says when you see a certain family in front of you, there's a stigma given to that family. Does that family get just cause? Does that family, because they come from a certain place, get a certain thing? Does that kid, because he's in the system and he comes before you in a jumpsuit, is looked at different? That's some of the signs, proven signs behind the fact that you don't want a kid to be in detention if they don't have to, because there's a lot of biases that come before getting before the judge. So that's the heart of that position of being supported.
Hi.
And that's already been hired and is in the budget, he's on, correct, Chris?
I hear that.
That's already in the budget, he's hired, he's on, correct?
He's on, this is the second year,
Yeah,
there's a third
so
year that comes with
This
it.
isn't new, that
And,
it's been.
and I don't think the boards accepted that position knowing that we were going to make it, that it was going to go, it's here.
Right, I just wanted to make clear
Yeah.
that it wasn't an upcoming position, it already exists
Yeah,
currently in the
Been
budget.
in existence for 1 year.
Miss, can you identify yourself for the record?
Oh, I'm sorry, Gina Miller.
Thanks.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, I'm Margaret Sexer-Burka. This question is for you, Commissioner Rogers. I've come to a few of these to try to educate myself and listen to your plan as well as Commissioner Kavanaugh's plan. And the one thing that I haven't been able to understand and was hoping that you
Now,
could...
my plan is the board's plan.
Sure, the board's plan. Yes, absolutely. Is why, when we're talking about spending $114 million, is this not something that is going to the vote of the people?
Let me say, this has been positioned like there's a law that says votes have to go to the vote of the people. That's not the case. The only way, and I'm giving my opinion on that, the only reason why things go for a vote of the people is the fact that vote of the people is another way for a financing mechanism. What's different about this is that Lancaster and Douglas County have only 2 counties that have a mechanism that's used to fund public buildings. That's the Public Building Commission. It's been in existence 50 years. The county and the city have funded building projects without voting the people for 50 years. Lincoln, Lancaster has used this model we're using at least over 10 times. The number I heard is higher than that, but at least over 10 times. There's a comparison given to OPS, and OPS did a bond issue. We did. 1, school districts don't have the Public Building Commission as a financing option. 2, there's no way you're going to finance on the taxpayers' back $1 billion. They don't have that room in their lid. They don't have the room to do that. And so they couldn't do that. The comparison is given to our public safety bond that was done a couple of years ago. The public safety bond was entirely the counties. So we couldn't use that mechanism. This is a mechanism that the board agreed to that was there. We can use to build buildings. It's an amount that we could have because our tax levy is somewhere close to half or lower, a little under lower of what's available there to do it. So it's nothing more than a simple finance choice. There's no magic in a public vote. There's this assumption that every public vote that has to do with capital has to go to the public. State capital, when you go up there, is being renovated. They didn't go to a vote of the people of Nebraska to do that. They financed it themselves. So it's just a simple choice. There's no magic in it, but it's a mechanism that was there to us, and we used it because of what we thought the gravity of the situation was to get this project done space-wise. Part of the thing that's not talked about to some degree is the fact that when I came on, Claire area, people are different, they've been there longer than me. We had 5 juvenile court judges. The space was cramped. For years, there had been this effort to get another judge. They finally broke through with Senator Chambers. But when that point came through, they were talking about 7 and 8. And we were like, whoa, we can't handle that. It was an understood agreement with the person that sponsored that bill, give us the time to get the facilities up to par. So when this all started, it was part of our efforts to get the facilities there. And this was the most efficient and fastest way to get there. So when he says that, you see design, 2 additional courtrooms for 7 and 8, which we assume are coming down the pipeline. So that's a little bit of the backstory that was there. And that's the way the board chose to do.
Thank you.
Yes, ma'am. No, Gina can do it.
Gina Miller. Thank you, Commissioner Rogers. I think you just touched on where I was heading. It's the genesis. I actually have two modes of thinking, one about the facility and one about programming. But about the facility in general was the genesis of all of this. And from my understanding, was about the additional judge that was being added, and there was just no space to add this person. And as you were going through the numbers, and I've known this for some time, but this is even more confusing to me now. If we were at 220 10 years ago, and we're at like 60 now,
71 is that?
71, thank you. I was going to give you the benefit of the doubt. What is the need for that additional judge if our placements have been dropping so substantially? I understand that there's people still going through the system, and maybe that's where I'm getting confused between programming and facility.
Okay.
That would be
What I'm about to tell you is not hard science. It's what we listen in the room and hear. So, Lancaster County, my understanding is per capita, where we are below the judges needed in the system function. So, Lancaster County is somewhere around 300,000. They have 5 judges. We are 550,000. We had 5 judges. So when I say per capita, per capita what we need for the system to function, we're behind. That's one of the cases for. But one of the things of the additional judge pieces, there's a committee that we have in the JDOT process called case processing, and we've been trying to get up to speed. A lot of the complaint is, as I said, as the numbers get smaller, the cases get harder. And a lot of these cases are the family cases and other things that sort of what they say is that there's not enough capacity there to move it through there. Now, the board fought that for a while. When I say fought it, there were some intense discussions between the bench and the board on that. They'll get the additional judges, but the board's pushback is we're not putting our butts on the line for status quo. So there's a discussion with them. So I'm not saying additional judges are the cure. I think they need more to be up to par and to make the system function, but there are some changes that they have to make. And that's a little bit of what we push, and that's a little bit of what the public needs to push too. There's players in the system that, and I can only speak to our piece. There was always this push where if we had more money for services, the board has walked out on the line for facilities, the board has walked on the line and committed more money, partnered with Sherwood for the money piece. Now, to the attorneys and everybody in the system, now the push is going to become, you need to change some things too. And so, that's not a formula, but that's the rationale behind the judge count and what it is. So,
Then can I just do the follow-up on the
Sure.
programming piece? Oh, I'm sorry, were you finished?
no, go.
Okay, so for those of us that have been involved in juvenile justice reform for a long number of years now, and see the pain in which it takes to make some of those big changes, the speed at which that happens, and knowing the devastation that happens to families with out-of-state placement, and knowing that margin of those lack of beds, and we're talking less than 3 years and kids that are already in the system that are being failed because of lack of progress. I'm still not hearing anything that gives me great comfort from the program piece, that is going to be able to make that jump and make that happen. Because I think we still have a lot of the same players that haven't made that mental move as some of you guys have. And you guys have made it, I would say, some of you pretty quickly in a pretty short period of time here recently, just because the moons and stars are reached. So I think that's where that push comes in of great distress from a taxpayer perspective and from a parent and from a juvenile justice reform advocate, that we're talking about a new building and we can't get the programming piece right.
Well, let me start with who's asking. Mike, knowing you just want to put out. The bench is changing. There's 6 people, 3 are definitely where the progression is, and the other 3 struggle a little bit on certain things and they're good on others. So I think that is turning over in our favor, but a little bit of this pressure helps on that end. For the programming piece, I don't want to be presumptuous because there's another discussion that needs to happen if this goes. I think there's another level of discussion that needs to happen in the community, and conversations that I've had with Mary Bicek on it is the point of saying, kind of sharing with the community how they operate, what the services are needed, and some services and some conversations with programming people about what they need to do to help us make those services available. Because if this 5 million comes online, we've got to have a debate about how that functions in the system, because probation has money for the back end. I'm greatly assuming the feeling of the board is for that money to operate up front with the families, so you don't have people penalized for poverty in the criminal justice system. To your other point of other things in the system, like I said, to your question about the now, 11, 12 is about now, we've invested about now, but there's a 3-year process for this building to come on. As I said, Sherwood has committed to a lead gift for a 18-bed facility to address a certain level of mental health that I think is to a little bit of what you all were saying. But nobody plans to build a new building and not have some idea about what to do with the old. I don't think we can talk about that a lot now, but I can say that there are willing players to discuss what happens at 42nd Street for the next level of care. The question came up last night, now just put it out there now. This is not going to stop out-of-home placement. We'll hopefully reduce it, and it won't stop out-of-home placement because, as an example, we have a long-term health facility that we support with about $16 million in taxpayer dollars to balance the fact, to balance that out and make it function. For us to have a similar facility here, it needs to be backstopped by the state. The state hasn't shown that commitment. Their closest thing to it is Geneva and Carmen. Judges don't trust it. A lot of people don't trust it. That's like a last-ditch effort if you go to Geneva and Carmen. So there's discussion about how do we do something with 42nd Street that prevents families from going out of state. And this is just discussion, so nobody walk out here saying the county got this plan. How do you use that? This is some discussion that are willing people at the table. And when I say that we have a window with the board understands we have a window. And it's kind of like, Lee, you're not going to agree with this, but Lyndon Johnson in the 60s, he pushed Medicare, Social Security, and all the Great Society programs through in that period of time. And we got a window to have major juvenile justice reform in place. And so the discussion is there, the things are there. So there's some things there that in time, and like I said, this building, this is about right now. This is not what's going on down the line. This project is continual, and there's some thought going there. We just can't say a lot about it. But the time is now to really change how things are going in Douglas County. And when I said at the beginning, civic pride, I mean, that's what we meant. It's not about the building of civic pride. It's about the county putting this stamp on this next level of reform and raising the level for the children and families, and that's really what everybody's always doing.
So I was just going to add, we see this with a lot of building projects, significant building projects, that there's a energy around the building project that we're seeing here tonight in the comments. I know there's been comments and meetings, for the past 9 years, but we see kind of a heightened awareness of those issues. There's 5 or 6 representatives from the county here tonight. There were that many or more last night. So I think there's more of a laser focus on what needs to happen. We talked about the assessment and the expediter. Those are things that have come out of understanding what the issues are. And I think that energy is going to continue for the next year to help improve the system. So the other point I wanted to touch on was building in flexibility, because the numbers may change. The number of kids in the youth center may continue to reduce, so how do we make that flexible to be used for other purposes? A big part of the demand was not just the courts, but how packed the Hall of Justice had gotten for attorneys and public defenders. We build a little bit of elbow room to expand into, but what are other plans for expansion? So building in flexibility, because as I mentioned, predicting the future is pretty hard to do. But I think, to your point, how can things happen more quickly? It's the energy around this building project.
And Lee, I was just, you being a good, consistent conservative, I was just making sure you was attentive about throwing LBJ in the Great Society and make sure you were there.
Catherine Cook, this is a question. I don't have a question, I just have some comments. I attended all Jim Kavanaugh's meetings, and I've been behind his plan totally. I think it's smarter, better, should go to a vote of the people. I agree with that guy's comments about pros and cons. It only makes sense. And I've wondered from the very beginning what Susie Buffett is going to gain from all this. And she's going to throw in $5 million. Why don't you ask her to throw in $50 million?
Actually, 10.
Yep.
Yeah. So yes, Tim. Well, let me say, I think there is I respect your opinion, and
It's also my goal to get out of Douglas County.
Okay.
Because I'm just really tired of it. Because I've been involved and I've been at meetings and been vocal, and what good does it do? What good does it do?
And to that
You don't
point,
listen anyway. You don't listen to people anyway.
No, ma'am. I think we listen totally, but listening doesn't mean that we agree on everything. With that said, your comment about the Sherwood Foundation is there's a certain amount of skin. There's nothing that they're gaining from this, and the agreements that we work jointly with the county and them. And the fact is that they're not going to fit the whole bill of it, because there's a certain amount of skin that government has to put in the game forward. They're willing to help, but they're not willing to take responsibility off government with what government needs to do. That donation is heavily going into the detention center, where they're invested in the reforms and the programs. The county's putting up the bill for the courthouse, which is a county and a government function. So they have nothing to gain for it. It's for us to put some skin in the game with it, and we are grateful for their contributions. They've been a partner with us for the last 6 years and helped us move forward. So if you want to talk afterwards, I'll be gladly willing to talk to you about what you think is about his plan and what I think is the benefit of our plan. So thank you for coming out. Yes, sir. Yep.
So,
Well, we got a question there. Any question?
Hello, I'm Michael O'Hara. I have 3 money questions, and 2 of them are really short. First, will you be giving to County Clerk Ernie Goss's entire report, not just the conclusion, so he can put it on his website tomorrow?
He's going to present it before the county board on the 21st.
I mean, will it be on?
He'll be in front of the public, and the clerk will get it, and the board will get it before then, so they can read it. So yeah, he'll be there.
So not tomorrow, okay. Second, the $5 million contribution that is sort of pledged had many, many conditions. And you mentioned in a conversation with many individuals that control whether or not the conditions on the Sherwood grant come through. Has anyone signed a contract promising they'll do what Sherwood said must be done for the county to get the $5 million? Has anyone?
There's no contract that needs to be signed. Those were heavily negotiating points, and we've talked to both those players, and we've talked to them, and they're moving in a progress where Sherwood's fine with it. So there's no contract that needs to be signed, any agreements. And as I mentioned when that article came in the paper, some of that was a starting point and it's still to be negotiated. So there's nothing that's happening right now that's hindering that. Most of the players, all the players that are involved and were represented in that letter are good progress. They're fine, they're meeting the requirements to be able to fulfill that letter.
And the third one's a little more complex. I want to make sure I understand the financing. The building commission is going to float the bonds, and the county is going to be the tenant. So the county is going to pay 100% of the bonds, and that's going to come out to about a 3-cent mill levy increase on a 21-cent mill levy. We're going to do that without a vote of the people. Do I have that right? Is anyone going to be paying off those bonds other than the county?
No, it's the county's to pay. It's the county's to pay.
So the county is going to allow revenue bonds to be sold and then pay off those revenue bonds, and we're going to do that without a vote of people, right?
I'm talking to Claire as the building commissioner. Yeah, that's fair. There's been no secret with that. That's been said.
Right, so we're going to do a 3-cent mill levy increase. To pay
We're
off
not
those
going
bonds.
to do a
I
flat.
got that number from your CFO.
We're not going to do a flat. There's no plans to do a flat 3%. I don't even know
Not
what that total
3%.
number would be, because right now you have to adjust in the fact that increased evaluations, there could be more revenue. So that's what was a conservative estimate, but it's not going to be like a flat 3% block. It will be phased in over time. But I'm going to answer that.
Yeah. I'm Joe Lorenz, I'm the county finance director, and the plan is that, in essence, the total amount would require 3 cents on the total, and it's not 21 cents, it's about 28 cents right now, so it would require 3 cents and 28 cents. But what we're saying is initially, the bond during a building period, which is very common with construction in the first 3 years, would be interest only. So, and to cover that interest-only component, in the first 3 years, we would just raise the levy $0.015, and that would get us through the construction period. And at that point, after the construction, people have moved in, and we have a better feel of costs, along with the, over that time, the increase in the valuations and the other costs, we would determine if we could get by with lesser than the 3 cents, or if it will cost the full 3 cents. So we're going to do it in 2 stages. We're going to do the preliminary, probably this September, and given that the bonds will be floated right about that time if things go according to plan. And then in 3 years, at the end of the construction, when the project becomes operational, we'd come back and revisit and see what the additional financing requirement would be.
You can do all that, you could do it with a vote. And ordinarily, you would do it with a vote, but you're not going to do it with a vote of the people.
No, not ordinarily, because we've never done this before. So this is the first time.
And I'm just glossing over the fact that is what part of the building, either building, is going to be occupied by the city?
It's eligible by the building commission because it's a connection to the existing courthouse and the annex. That's what makes it viable.
That wasn't my question. What part of either building will be occupied by the city? That is to say, a joint use facility, which is what's statutorily authorized.
My understanding is city prosecutor, but the core of your question is, I'm assuming that since you're trying to say it is not occupied by somebody from the city, it's not eligible. That's not the case from my understanding legally, because it is connected to the courthouse as an annex, it applies. So it fits the law and the standards of the law.
I'm supposed we'll find out?
Well, I think we already did.
So
Yes, sir. I'll come to you, but you had a chance, so I'm trying to get some other people that didn't.
Hello, my name is William Harris. I'm a juvenile attorney in Nebraska in Omaha. I've been practicing for about 15 years. I've done delinquency cases for juveniles, parent cases with neglect. And over the years, as has been talked about, the detention has gone down. Detention is meant for a juvenile who has a flight risk, danger to themselves or danger to others. But we have these kids languishing in the detention facility based on, a lot of it is based on not being able to get services to these youths. If they're co-located, in my opinion, this is kind of streamline the process. Nebraska, we're still a state that rehabilitates, that looks at rehabilitating our youth, as opposed to a state like Texas that looks at punishing our youth. Where the juveniles are currently detained at in the detention center, I mean, the prisons, I practice criminal law too, the prisons have nice facilities. And if we can get the judges in the same place, the prosecutors, the defense attorneys, the community service people, this will help prevent these juveniles from, once they work their way in the juvenile system, going out and picking up adult crime. So I just wanted to put that out there. Anybody else, if I go back to Tyler?
Bob Herron. I have several questions. One about Brad Alexander said, the director of the youth center, said that the maximum occupancy of the facility is 75% because separating genders. So is really the 64-bed unit only going to hold 50 children?
No, that question came up after the meeting yesterday. I'm assuming he's making that statement because they're making accommodations for free, which is the Prison Regulation Act. But that's all taken into consideration with the building of this facility has been considered with that. So I don't think that would be an issue to the group.
Okay, I think we need to check that out because he still stands by that 75% quantity. So apparently communication hasn't gotten clear. And the other one is that...
Communication's been clear. I think...
No, it hasn't been clear according to Alexander.
And I'm telling you as a member of the board that you're supposed to make communication.
Oh, okay, then we'll have to disagree, or I'll have to get up to
We'll
date.
just have to disagree.
That'll be fine. And so now putting this detention center downtown will have an enormous impact on the surrounding neighborhood, particularly the Blackstone Hotel. And even the major developer for that whole area has elected not to do anything and probably turn his land into a parking lot. We have other developments, and even one of our most famous architects said that's the worst thing you can do to downtown is put a detention facility in it. So how are we addressing that?
One, I don't think that statement is totally accurate, and I can't say why because of development reasons, but I know there's some interest down there. And the second part of your question is, this facility, I honestly don't think the average person that doesn't know will be able to tell this is a facility for youth detention. Plus, to your point in that situation, development's been going down there for the last 30 plus years when you really one block away from the place have really dangerous people in the county jail. So that hasn't hindered development, and I don't think this will either.
No, the county jail has stopped development in that area around it, so its entire perimeter is dead, basically. So let me branch into one of the things for the architects. Parking has been a big issue since day one for this project, and so I'm glad to know that you have parking on the first level. And will that be for all the people that work in the buildings and the public that comes to visit or be a part of the programs?
Is it fair to say there's another project the building commission is working on the park?
So the parking is not for the public?
There's another project being worked on for park for the public that the building commission is handling.
Okay, but the presentation said there's parking on the first level. What is that for?
So it's not a requirement, but you don't want public parking underneath the courts building. It is a requirement for federal courts, but it's a recommendation for county courts. So that's just secure parking for the judges. There's still some capacity in the 19th Street public parking structure. And as Chris mentioned, there's, with the developer that you mentioned and with the city parking director, there's been conversations of a joint parking structure. So there would be additional parking, most likely. I mean, we continue to evaluate the use of the 19th Street. And this is really a public building commission discussion, and I don't want to overstep my bounds.
But I guess the hard answer is the public won't be allowed to park underneath that building.
No.
Okay,
Because
so parking really doesn't, it's just private parking for how many spaces?
No, yeah, that's basically, there used to be
8
public,
spaces?
there used to be public parking underneath the current county building.
So
And
the
after
plan's a
9/11
little bit misleading.
Let me ask you a question. There used to be there won't be any public parking under the building. There will be staff parking and judges parking. That philosophy is a security reason, and after 9/11, we don't let people park underneath the building because of those reasons. There's current capacity over on the facility to the west of the building, and there is conversations right now about additional parking facility for that.
Okay, so parking hasn't been included, but it's being thought about.
No, parking, there's some adequate space for people to park. But the building is 3 years away. There's discussion right now about parking with the building commission that, they're talking about now.
Is that the lot that you purchased with the OHA building?
Yeah.
Is that what you're talking about?
Possibly.
Well, so the parking, so there's only 8 parking spaces in the new structure, is that correct? Yeah, just 8, okay. And then the first floor is called lobby or public space. How much access will the public really have to those spaces? Do they have to go through security, or how does that work?
So in the MUD building, there's more free access, and that entire first floor is community space. So community providers or a large community room like this. In the tower, there's also community space, but anyone that goes into that tower will have to go through security as a court building, just like the Hall of Justice.
Okay, would that be true of the detention center too?
The detention center is a secured facility. There's lobby space on the first level of the youth center, and that you don't have to go through security to be in that lobby space.
Okay.
So there'd be some family rooms outside of the secure area, but primarily exist in the first level of the MD building.
Okay, and then the last one is, what's the main difference between this new design and the existing design? Because what I'm hearing are colors and wood doors.
Well, no, it goes a lot further than that. With treating acoustics, that's something that it changes your experience in space. The quality of lighting changes your experience in space. So it's beyond materials, but materials and color are part of it, daylight's part of it. And it would be a stark comparison to the existing facility.
One of the differences between the current facility is one, there's trauma-informed aspects that have to do with color, makeup, and other things of that. 2, the existing facility has a health service aspect that was added on to that. This will have one included in there to some degree. This aspect will have better educational facility to address the concerns and the hope that we have of partnering with OPS to make sure that those kids' education continue when they go back out. And also, it just has the difference of the co-location piece to be able to make it more functional for the system. So there's some distinct changes in that. The justice center that we have now was built at a time where basically youth facilities were built in the philosophy of an adult detention facility. That day is gone, and there will be stark differences in how we go about addressing that to serve the kids and the families. Right now, you don't have adequate space. You don't have a good, conducive space for families to meet. That's not going to be the case. And so there'll be a substantial difference. Now, to be consistent with other ones, it's 7:29, so we allow one more question, and then if you want to ask any questions, we will be here to every question
Does anybody that has not spoken who wishes to ask a question? Otherwise, I'll go to Tyler, because he got his hand before you, Larry. I'm sorry. So Tyler will get the last question. Not a diatribe, 5 minutes, you promise? Anybody else before I go? Oh, Mary Ann, will you speak?
No. So, 2 things, because I want to answer a question that Bob Parent had. So, I'm a state certified correctional officer. So I've worked in both state facilities and county facilities. And I can tell you from professional experience that yes, you only use about 75% of your capacity due to PREA, which is the Prison Rape Elimination Act, and then due to classification purposes of the offenders, due to gang affiliation and things of that nature, you have to keep them separate. So it's statistically proven that yes, you only use about 75% of your rated capacity. Do you want a rebuttal to that before I ask my second point?
Yeah, because the operational capacity right now is at about 96, and that's not because of allocation clear, that's just what the service is. I mean, I don't think that's consistent in what you're saying, because right now, you got an adult facility that's at 87% occupancy. And that's not in a 25% reduction because of that. So what's the second question?
So my next question, so your financing is through the Public Building Commission. The Public Building Commission has already voted against this project once. So you also say that Lincoln, or Lancaster County, uses this financing option all the time. They've used it for multiple projects. Can you give some examples of what those projects were? And then can you also kind of maybe clarify how you're going to convince the Public Building Commission to vote yes? Because you've already asked them to vote once and they voted no, and you're now going to them again and asking them to vote on this issue again, when that whole problem can be avoided by going to a vote of 2-4.
Let me ask the Building Commission question first, and I'll give the clarify the project.
Yeah.
The Building Commission's vote was just a failed vote. There's been failed votes before elected bodies before, and what we try to do is inform those people there, and so we think based on information we give, that it'll be receptive this time.
I would say the Building Commission did vote down the $120 million request on a 3-2 vote. The Building Commission has since come back and put in $6 million to buy the MDC property, so we obviously do have some support for this project. And the project will be coming back to us now on May 23rd at a $115 million level. As the program continues to evolve, when they came to us before, they were at 48 beds. Now it's at 64 beds. So it's not the same project. I'm hopeful that we will pass it this time.
You want to talk about other projects? You know any?
Oh, in Lincoln, they have built something around 30 different buildings. Their building commission, everything but the jail. They did not build the jail, but every other building that either Lincoln or Lancaster County has built in the last couple of decades, their building commission has built for them. So this is a real commonly used mechanism down there. We have not used it up here for a joint facility. We used it like for the parking garage. Bear in mind, there was not a public vote for our courthouse, for the civic center, for the parking garage. We've never had a public vote on any of those. And I know the floor is yours, but I gotta make a real quick point. Don't assume that because the public votes, it becomes free. Commissioner Kavanaugh has said, his project's gonna cost about the same as ours. And I maintain that therefore, the taxes are going to be about the same, either way. So don't go to the conclusion that a public vote suddenly means this is free. What a public vote would do is A, kick the can down the road for a minimum of a year. And what Commissioner Kavanaugh has never answered to me is, when you admit we have to expand the courthouse, and that's the biggest part of this project, what's your plan B? What do you do if the people voted down and we have to expand it anyway? To me, that's disingenuous. So that's where I'm coming from.
So some of the projects that, but I didn't get my question answered. I didn't get my question answered.
So with that,
I didn't get my question answered.
we'll answer it. So with that, I want to thank you all for coming out. If you got any more questions, we'll be right here to answer them.
So can I get an answer to my question?
We'll come out.
So what building is this using